Every presentation from DALDOT starts with our mission, which is excellence in transportation for every trip, every mood, every dollar, and every one. Strive to achieve all of these things in everything that we do. And our next slide, we'll look at the most recent fatality report. So this is a report that's updated every week by our traffic team, documents the fatalities in the state. This year, as of this past Monday, we've had 16 fatalities so far, and I can actually update this a little bit further. As of a meeting this morning, we were at 18, unfortunately. So that number has increased by 2 in the past 3 days. Fortunately, these numbers are lower than they were last year at this time, and same as 2022. We do this multi-year comparison to just make sure we're checking, across the years. So the numbers are headed in the right direction, but we continue to work to make sure that we're reducing them as much as possible. And this study is a great way to make sure that we keep working towards reducing fatalities across the state and in the area.
All right, and I'll take it from here. So this is our agenda. We're running a little bit behind, but I think we'll make up some time. And basically, this is the stakeholder meeting of the Greenwood Bridgeville Transportation Plan effort, which is underneath the Coastal Corridors Study effort, kind of more of an umbrella component, and we'll revisit that. I know, those who were participating in this effort since the beginning are familiar with where this came from. So I'll try to balance not overly recapping what many of you already know. We'll focus in on what's new since we last touched base in the spring, which is the final draft plan. Final draft does not imply that there's no time for comment. There will be a 30-day comment period, and the draft actually is on the Greenwood Bridgeville public input page, which DALDOT manages. Maybe one of either Molly or Austin could drop that link in the chat. I will also give information about how to access that at the end, so I can kind of walk people through steps, because that is the way that DALDOT is streamlining efforts to stay in touch with people, especially in the virtual and online realm. And then we'll talk a bit about some next steps, as Molly alluded to. So just a few recaps. The purpose of this effort was and is to kind of take a broader look and coordinate transportation planning, land use, community planning, looking over a longer time horizon, and by longish, 20-ish years, getting an understanding of what we're expecting in the future, and then walking it back to what are the priorities that can be done today to help address and achieve the vision that the community is looking for. So you might recall those are things that we had talked about over the course of this process. In part, I also want to just recap for DALDOT, this planning studies process, or the planning phase of getting ideas all the way through toward implementation, are captured in this visual. So you start with a study, which is like what we have done here. We progress to producing recommendations, and those then, especially those that become prioritized, make their way into a capital program, for example, and then onward through design and implementation. So that's just an FYI for those that aren't as familiar. To recap our specific process with this Greenwood Bridgeville Transportation Plan, you'll recall, those who have been with us, we started back a little over a year ago in November 2022. Kicked things off. We looked at existing conditions, and I'm not going to go into those details. Those are in the draft plan, and you've seen them. Things that you saw all the way up through last May when we had our public workshop to share the draft recommendations really haven't changed. So it's all just in a single document now. And even the recommendations haven't changed substantially. There's just a few kind of finer points on status and things that are notable. We had that public workshop back in the winter to gather thoughts and ideas from the public as well as you all. Then we progressed into the spring, developing recommendations, drafting those and sharing them at the public workshop late last May. And then over the summer and into later 2023, we were working to pull the draft recommendations into this document. And obviously you see some new faces, so getting Austin up to speed and moving forward, and you'll hear about several of the status updates as I progress. All right, again, just to recap, these next few slides are about how we arrived at the recommendations. So this isn't necessarily new to those who have been involved, but recapping, I think, for some good context. There's kind of two components to what we did, and I alluded to the longer range planning aspect of it, which is what this graphic speaks to, and I'll elaborate in a second here. And then there's the more localized sort of near-term issues that also came through, and I'll mention more about that in a moment. So that's where this plan is really coming from. The area-wide or longer range look is important to, I guess I kind of said this earlier, but it's important to understand what are we anticipating to happen in the future and how do we plan for that? How do we make sure we're coordinating across, the local government who manages land use and DelDOT who needs to manage the transportation system. And as some of you know, 90% of the transportation system in Delaware, the roads, are DelDOT managed, maintained. And so that coordination is really important. So that's the essence of where this is coming from. This map, you don't need to fully understand it, but the purpose is this reflects some of the technical work that goes into this planning. So the darker blues and greens represent areas that are expected to grow based on forecasting of population. There's a similar map in the report that does something similar with employment data. And so we kind of get a look at, okay, these are the areas where there may be more traffic trips generated and demand for that. And so then you jump to this slide, which represents what the forecast or estimated traffic was current as of 2022-ish or 2019 AADT, I guess. And then what we think based on the land use forecast and other data points, what would be projected to the future. So the red circles show the roadways or the corridors that we're anticipating some change. Again, forecast doesn't mean you can predict the future, but it's our best. The best we can do and what we want to be doing is planning ahead so that it's not reactive, but we're being proactive. So red and road, which you'll hear more about, there's a capital transportation program project programmed for that. And then 404 is one we've talked about before, where we're not at the point, and I'll reiterate, 2050 is the year, so it's not like this is happening tomorrow, but that's a roadway we'll want to watch. And then 16 through Greenwood is also one that was identified. Okay, and then this map you've also seen before. The point here is that public input or the public engagement process, those items here in blue identify where concerns came through that channel. And transportation assessment, so the areas in yellow, are kind of more the corridors or issues that were raised through some transportation analysis, like roadway sufficiency assessment and some other data-based evaluations. And so collectively, you'll see these things reflected in the plan, but that just reminds us of where we've come from. And some of these two were certainly both public input as well as the analysis. Our principles, if we think back to early meetings that we had, we determined that there were several important priorities broadly. So certainly safety, navigation of large vehicles. We know this area has farm vehicles, freight vehicles, school buses, and other larger vehicles. So that's something that came up repeatedly. Safety and traffic around schools, supporting local agriculture and the economy, including industrial corridors noted. Balancing growth, so talking about routing traffic around versus through towns and the importance to the towns of some of the traffic, but also that challenge of traffic that may come through the towns as well. Larger vehicles is one of them that was raised as a challenge and a priority. And then connectedness of the community. So that speaks to both kind of neighborhoods connecting, but also roadways and having opportunities for multimodal travel and interconnectivity that way. Many of the recommendations that I'm about to kind of summarize had more of a near-term localized concern aspect of it. And many of that we heard from you and the public. Also, there are some longer term. And so as I pivot to talking about plan highlights, I'll explain a little bit more about how the plan recommendations are organized. A few of the locations that emerged as more significant recommendations are US 13 at SR 16, 404 at Scottsdale Road, Newton Road, and Redden Road. So again, those are things you would have heard back in May when we last touched base. But we'll be focusing on moving forward with those near-term priorities, and then also tracking things that are, not quite as urgent, but certainly we captured them in this plan and we want to track them going forward. Okay, so I will now home in on the recommendations. And again, I'm not going to go through all of them. This map shows you sort of geographically the entirety of the areas, corridors, locations that have recommendations from this plan. I also want to be clear, the fact that, like, for example, US 13 is all yellow does not mean there's issues, urgently needing to be addressed through the whole corridor. This map simply puts forth recognition of the areas where generally we had discussed and then further identified some next steps in the recommendation section of the report. So want to be clear, it's not a long list of urgent needs, but a range. Then in terms of speaking of kind of level of urgency or time frame for these recommendations, in the rightmost column of the report, there's a table in the report under the recommendation section. And in one of the columns, it talks about the type. And so we organize them by, these 4 types. Just to help people understand kind of what the next step would be, generally speaking, with the recommendations. So some things can be conducted under existing programs. For example, you'll hear about on some of the next slides examples of what these are. So actually, I'll pause and not give you the examples as we go. Then there's recommendations that need a second phase of study. And so we'll talk about some of those, and that's really what we'll feature still in this presentation. Items that need a CTP, Capital Transportation Program line item. Those are more substantial, so you'll see, and I'll mention those in a bit more detail. And then some things that are not urgent, again, as I said, but probably longer term, year-to-year things that will be monitored through existing monitoring processes. And then as things, indicators, metrics, suggest, this issue is starting to look like we should be focused in on it more, that's the intent of a recommendation that's identified as a type 4. So now, just a few highlights again to give you examples of those different types. So here in the Greenwood area, the first type, something that could be conducted under existing operations, is the stretch of Market Street 1636 and ongoing curve studies. This isn't the only one with the identifier as Z. There are several others that you'll see on the next map, but places where there are curves, DelDOT Traffic is and has been looking at those in an ongoing way. So that type of thing can be directed to them, and that will then be progressed under that existing program. The second type, needing a second phase of study, for example, would be the pedestrian crossing issue that was brought up. And I believe Janet is probably or could be more up to speed than I am, because I know that last status was that DelDOT had been in touch with you talking about options for pedestrian crossing, and that a crossing was warranted, but need to figure out some next steps with that. So that would require some additional work going forward. This was a concern that was raised regarding trucks kind of routing through on routes that weren't necessarily desirable for trucks. And again, I think that would be something that can benefit from taking a closer look at in a separate next phase study. Items of the type 3 Redden Road, that's actually the one that is identified in this list of recommendations as type 3, needing a capital transportation program line item. And that actually is in the capital transportation program as of late, the most recent one that actually was just heard by the Council of Transportation. So that one is moving forward. And those are enhancements to the eastern side of US 13 toward the US 113 corridor related to safety enhancements. And then lastly, monitoring and sort of longer term, year to year. There's several of these. I mean, DelDOT is monitoring in various ways, whether it be watching crash data or looking at land use change and sort of keeping track of where the growth is anticipated, or looking through the lens of, for example, some of the curve studies or traffic operations management planning that looks a bit closer at some of the hot spots for congestion. So there are different mechanisms, but the US 113 concerns that came out of our process for this study talked about corridor crossover and access management. And so the corridor capacity preservation program is one where those types of issues can be looked at, and that's where we would expect sort of the broader, as development occurs, how do we ensure that those crossovers are done in a way that's safe and that the system is continually evolving toward the best design possible. All right, so now down to Bridgeville, a few more examples. Some of these I've already talked about. So just briefly, in that area, an example of the conducting under existing operations would be the concern raised about sight lines and some trees that needed trimming. So that's something that we can hand off to DelDOT Maintenance and Operations to take a look at. Then the Scott Store Road actually is one that's of a type 2 up in the top left corner of the map here. And that I'll be actually talking about on the next slide. So I'll keep us moving, keep an eye on the time. So the US 13 at 16 intersection area, we had talked about, as we talked about people's concerns, this intersection through our process was identified as a crash hotspot based on some analysis done for the broader coastal corridor study back in 2021-22 timeframe. Also, this signal, the signal system of this intersection had been identified as needing a rebuild. So that actually, the status of that is that it is ongoing. It's being coordinated with the town of Greenwood. And the latest I've heard is that the signal rebuild is actually moving forward. They're reaching out to property owners surrounding it because they anticipate some property impacts. And so that you might actually, some of you might even be familiar with as this moves forward. Other issues just contextually here were the idea of focusing on pedestrian safety and other multimodal enhancements. And so those also are more of an ongoing, a type 4, if you will, implementation type. So, okay, Redden Road, I mentioned that the area further east is programmed to move forward for safety enhancements of the corridor. And then also folks had brought up this intersection as one where I think there was some sense of like the signal phasing was confusing, as well as some of the pavement markings. So that actually, the status of that is it has been evaluated by the traffic studies group. And as of last note, last spring, they were doing that look. And so adjustments may have been done, but that is moving forward with that group. And again, so that's a type 1. Okay, this is probably one of the areas that got more comments, from my recollection, back at our workshop last February than any from those who I spoke with. So you'll see here, this is Scott Store Road, 404, heading in sort of the northwest, southeast direction. And we heard several things, but narrow or really non-existent shoulders, some awkward turning movements through here. So concerns about the horizontal configuration of the intersection and some safety concerns as well. And so this is one that would need a second phase of study. And that's something that LDOT planning is aware of. And I don't have any further information about exactly, when that might happen, but this is one that was noted. Okay, and then Newton Road. This one also is probably among those that had top comments in our engagement. So this is a freight corridor. We acknowledged that this intersection, this misaligned intersection and curve is one that had some concerns. There really are fairly narrow and in some places kind of no shoulders really. So what kinds of opportunities are there for multimodal needs? That could mean freight, it could mean just regular traffic, it can also mean pedestrians, bicycles, etc. So this corridor is one. I guess I had slide transitions on that received several sets of recommendations. Ultimately, I'm going to talk about this in a moment. Those have been consolidated, and this will be moving forward, actually is getting underway this year, this fiscal year, and into next. So now basically as a corridor study, a phase 2 or a type 2 next phase corridor study. So we'll be looking at several of those issues as that moves forward. And that continues on across 13, where there were some comments and concerns about access management and some turning movements and such, merging movements, and then onward down to Fawn Road. So those are the highlights of, the key sort of recommendations and a basic status overview. Again, if you're looking for more detail, please do look at the study or the report itself, the draft report. And I can't see if it's in the chat, but I'll show you, if it's not, how to get to that and where we will be kind of keeping people up to speed and engaging going forward. So stepping back a bit, we've talked about coastal corridor study. So there is that broader area, and some of my maps actually had that study area delineated. But this effort, it focused on Greenwood Bridgeville, came from the broader coastal corridor study that began several years ago, back 2019, 2020-ish. So these projects, Newton Road Corridor Study, will be a continuation of that into this fiscal year, which ends June 30th, and then onward into the next fiscal year, starting July 1. The study itself also has goings-on the eastern side of the broader area, closer, Milton, Ellendale, that end of the broader study area. And that group actually has a corridor committee meeting next Tuesday to share highlights from the draft report and recommendations. From that effort, there are a couple other forthcoming studies going on. So Milton Active Transportation, a look at SR16 corridor in the Milton area, and then also US 9. And there's also a webpage, public input page that you can access to get more information about that. So I'm going to just wind down here talking about the Newton Road Corridor Study that will be ramping up. So this will kind of be the next step with engagement, I guess, at this point. Our broader Greenwood Bridgeville study is winding down, and so the focus will be Newton Road in the next year or so. The scope, I kind of touched on this already, so I'll be brief, but you can see outlined in green on the map here is that corridor. I mentioned, the curves and some safety concerns that were raised through our effort up to this point, multimodal needs and opportunities, I didn't mention some of the developments that are planned in this area. So that's something we'll want to be looking at and considering in terms of how do people access those new developments, especially in light of this being a significant freight corridor, as well as a corridor that links up to the nearby school, high school. And then some routing and navigation, again, I think related to especially the idea that this is freight traffic and also the beach traffic and folks using this to navigate for the eastern end of Sussex County. As far as the timeline for that, we'll be kicking things off soon here this spring, and we anticipate that will first involve connecting with the town of Bridgeville. So Bethany will be in touch, and the county and Office of State Planning to coordinate a bit more. And then as we move forward, likely this spring, but this is tentative, a public workshop and some sort of survey, and then producing a memo, a tech memo that summarizes what the existing conditions are, kind of narrows in on, because obviously we know from the Greenwood Bridgeville broader study some of the broad issues, but we're going to be narrowing in. So our lens focuses in on the corridor. And then moving forward into next fiscal year, starting July and moving onward probably to about June 2025, we'll have some additional engagement and similar to this study, have some findings and recommendations specific to the corridor and go on from there. And I'm going to now show a little demo, well, in one more slide, of what that public input resource is. I can't recall if we had it up. I think we did actually back last spring when we had the public workshop in May. So it might be familiar to some of you, but it is a tool that will be useful for Newton Road and others going forward as you desire to interact and keep up to speed with DelDOT's efforts. So it's good to know generally.
Andrea, I just wanted to let you know, I put in both the link to the Coastal Corridor site as well as to the one to this study for this plan.
Super.
In the chat. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, everyone can take a look there. So as far as next steps coming out of the Greenwood Bridgeville transportation plan, now through April 11th, which is four weeks from now, is the public comment period. I'll show you in a moment where you can submit your comments, where we'd like you to submit your comments through the public input. It just helps funnel things to one place and helps make sure that we've caught everything. Certainly email and phone call is fine too, if that's most convenient. Then I mentioned 2 coastal corridors, upcoming meetings. So that broader study area and effort has some meetings coming up. Next Tuesday, 5 p.m. Is a committee meeting that is specific to a committee, a body like this one that's been meeting all along. We would encourage you, if you're a member of the public and not a member of that committee, to participate by Zoom, just because we're a little concerned about capacity of the facility. But more information, if you need, is available on the state's public meeting website and another public input page that I'll show you in a moment. And then anticipating a public workshop for that effort later this spring. And now I will talk about and show you the DelDOT Interactive Hub. And this is kind of the last piece here, and then we can have some questions or discussion, or we can wrap up a little early if we're all good. So DelDOT Interact is a hub that really got established last spring, and we were one of the first to use it with our Greenwood Bridgeville project. So some of you may already be connected. If you're not, and you want to continue to stay connected and just reliably kind of have access to updates that we put on the Greenwood Bridgeville page, as well as coastal corridors, I would encourage you to go to the hub. There is a very brief sign up. It's called a light login. You don't have to give tons of information. I think all it is email, basically. And that just helps in part ensure that we're not getting all kinds of like chat bots or bots, I guess might be the term. getting into the site and sort of bogging it down. So it helps us as we use the site to get information out in an efficient way. There are some features that I think we'll be using to, again, streamline communication. So if you sign up, then updates that are made to the page, you get notified. This is the general page. So if you Google Dell.interactive or Dell.interact, you would come to this page. This is a landing page. And there's some tabs up top where you can look at the list of projects. I think, yeah, project map. You can see a map of projects across the state. And then some lists of meetings and events. Let me clarify, some of you may be familiar with another Dell.projects web page that's more focused on projects that are more in the design phase and either have moved forward, so it represents an archive, but also are moving forward. So I don't want to confuse you. That still exists. This isn't replacing that, but this one focuses more on the studies or planning stages. So we're doing our best to make sure that there's some overlap so that if someone comes here and they're interested in goings on, for example, in this area, we're trying to keep everyone up to speed with what's going on. But anyway,
just a time check. It's 11:42.
Thank you. And then as you scroll down on that main page, there are a list of active projects and surveys, as well as projects that have been archived that are from the past. You will find Greenwood Bridgeville Transportation Plan here. So you can click there to get to the page. There are several ways. And here is what that page looks like. So this might be familiar to you. It has been updated. So now instead of the May 18th session, which was live, and that was what you would have seen a month ago, there's a public comment spring 2024. Then you can see Austin's contact information over here. Well, Austin as the contact, I should say. This isn't his direct email, but this goes to the project. And then we can get people's comments, communications to us, even phone calls, all organized so that Austin doesn't have to sift through emails, and we're doing our best not to miss anyone. So that's available. And then this is where you find the link to the plan, as well as, I don't want to say a survey because that sounds quite involved. One comment window where you can place your comments about the plan. That doesn't preclude you from sending an email. So, if the comment window isn't going to work for you, you may certainly send your comments another way and reach out if you have any questions. So you'd click on this participate, which is shown at the bottom of my screen right now, and that would just bring you to a new window where you can download and open up the plan, draft plan, and also answer a few questions, if you would, on demographic information. So that information is helpful to Dell.dot to see who's participating and just do their best to continue to promote equity and kind of adapt and respond as needed to be sure that their opportunities are as accessible as possible to the full range of people in the community. On the right of the screen is the specific URL link that you can type in to your browser, and that should bring you to this page. Or right now, if you wanted to open up your camera and go through the QR code, that's what this is for. And I'll point out Coastal Corridors West, I have identified here simply to acknowledge that this is the western side of, again, that broader Coastal Corridor study area, and the eastern side, which is what the group next week is meeting on, and the report that they've got drafted focuses on the eastern area.
Yeah, and Andrea, I just wanted to add, as this committee is composed of representatives of the community, that we highly encourage everyone to, make sure that as much as possible to share this link out with their circles and really make sure that we can connect with as many people as possible. Things get lost, and we want to make sure that we're spreading this out as much as possible. So that would be greatly appreciated if that link could be shared far and wide with your connections.
Yeah, thank you. Good point. Glad you brought that up. And this screenshot then just shows you what to expect on that subsequent page that I was just talking about. So asking and giving you the opportunity to share your comments here and download the plan. All right. And then wrapping up here, this shows you, so that broader area that I was referring to, this is the view of that public input page for that broader study area. And it right now focuses in on the eastern side outlined here in green. As that effort winds down, and then also does something similar to what we're doing here, whereas it will focus in on those Milton studies and some other sub-area studies, corridor studies moving forward in the coming year. This project page, we intend for it to be an umbrella. So you'll probably see a tab for Greenwood Bridgeville and a tab for the other sub-studies, I'll call them sub-area studies here. So we'll look forward to continue to stay in touch with folks this way. Ideally, we will interact predominantly through the email updates, through public input. Some of this we're still learning too, so we'll do our best to try not to inundate and streamline communication so that you're not getting tons of emails, but you are getting emails that keep you up to date. But reach out if you do have any questions. And similarly here, you've got the URL for this page and the QR code. And with that, yeah, that winds down our presentation. So if folks have questions, comments, I know, you have not looked at the full draft plan as it currently exists. It is similar. Well, it contains much of the same content that you saw last year. So now it's just all bundled together in a nice document. But what questions? I'm gonna actually stop screen sharing so I can see people's faces. Oop. What questions or thoughts do people have? And thanks again for joining.
I'll go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
How are you doing? Steve and Karen from Bridgeville, Delaware. And I'll just comment. I'm a business owner on the western side of the county. I'm on the school board. I'm in the fire company. And the bulk of my work is along the Route 1 corridor. And I appreciate the time everybody's put into this. I know it's not easy. From where I sit, this is a corridor study, but we still do not have a corridor. And I want to see the slide where we're proposing what's the plan to get a 4-lane highway from Maryland, where they've got the 4-lane highway, to Route 1. And until we do that, I mean, this is a Bridgeville maintenance plan. Every project on there is maintenance on underfunded roads. We're not funding them. We're not keeping up with development. Your first slide was growth projections. Pretty much everywhere around us was shown as zero growth. I can look out my front door and I saw there's 160 units getting built right now. And this is since 2015, and they built 600 units in just Heritage Shores. So, I mean, in all reality, I don't see these slides as realistic. I appreciate you guys' time. You work within a budget. But, we're diluting traffic. Seashore Highway's crowded, so let's expand the road. Well, it's still got to go to 13. We're building a Cloverleaf in Georgetown, so everybody that's exiting off of 404 and Redden Road still has to go through Georgetown and the circle in Georgetown, the town of Georgetown. Then to Route 9, where he's got to sit for a half an hour to get through the Harbison Light. This is something my guys do every single morning. The people on the west side of the county work at the beach. The beach traffic goes through Bridgeville and Greenwood. And I apologize, but I really want to see the slide someday of a 4-lane highway or something to address what we're seeing on a daily basis. And that's the corridor. This is a maintenance plan.
Well, thank you for your comment. Yep. Several of the priorities that you'll hear coming out of the coastal corridors, the eastern side certainly acknowledge some of those needs. And the study did identify, I mean, that's where this branch off of Eastern and Western came from, is there's some higher priorities that were identified through the broader sort of area-wide look at land use and transportation trends that are being prioritized. And we mentioned Redden Road and the Capital Transportation Program. And certainly aware of, the Western sort of Maryland side of things and keeping tabs on what's going on there. So yes, you're right. We don't We don't
s-
currently have.
And like I said, I don't want to discount the time you guys have put in and the hard work. And I just, until people start commenting or taking part in these meetings, you know, maybe we're not being heard. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, I agree. Thanks for everyone's participation here. It is very helpful. Other questions, comments? Sure, Bill. Oh, you're muted.
Okay. I didn't know which microphone I had to unmute.
Can hear you. Yep.
I echo Steve's comment about the need for a plan from the Maryland border to SR1. What angle I'm going to ask about is, can you review again how it is things, the projects or improvements that are identified get evaluated and put into the CTP? Since major work is actually done, as I understand it, funded through the CTP, how do things go from here, from where we are today, to getting into the CTP?
Sure, I'm going to bring up. It's a fairly simple slide, but this was the
Not
graph.
the process.
So say that again.
I said your slide may be a simple slide, but the process is not.
Yeah, so partly you start with a plan, and that's what this process has been, is looking at broad level. You recall the slide I had on speaking to, you know, the whole, what are the land use, population, employment trends related to that? Then what is the capacity that we're anticipating needing, or what is the demand we're anticipating being deriving from that or coming from that growth in population? And from there, that helps us identify kind of a system look, broadly speaking, where are we anticipating needs arising sooner, I guess, is the best way of putting it. So with a plan such as this, that gives us a sense of, okay, there's an area we're gonna be focusing in on. Here's one, and you heard several of them that we've identified and gave the example of the Redden Road enhancements that have been programmed into the Capital Transportation Program. So the Capital Transportation Program has a prioritization process that looks at different criteria and literally uses data and scores to rank and prioritize. And for areas with a metropolitan planning organization, there's involvement from that body. And in the interest of not going too deep down a rabbit hole, I'm going to keep going. Hopefully it'll be clear. In Sussex County, there is not a metropolitan planning organization at this point. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do in this effort of working together, the community, the land use agencies, DelDOT for sure, and DelDOT planning is, okay, let's see, you know, where the needs are. And so back to that list of criteria and scoring. So project ideas come through these types of studies, and then scores based on data such as related to safety, congestion, economic interests or economic development, kind of broadly speaking. Let's see, local priority. I'm not sure if that's the name of the category. Austin, you're shaking your head. Yes. What else am I missing? There's several. But as you can see, so those criteria that align with the scores that align with criteria that are defined then are applied to the range of projects, the list of projects, and those that score at the top then generally move forward. I mentioned the Council on Transportation, which is a body that takes a look at that and kind of, I think, votes. Austin, is that they literally
Yes,
vote?
that's correct.
To progress the CTP draft list forward, and then it goes on from there.
Yep.
And I did forget to say, last August, I think that was roughly when it was last summer, there was a public workshop all over the state. I think there were at least one in each county, and in some cases several, including virtual. So that was, those lists get shared to the public, and there's an opportunity to review those, comment on those, and so forth. And that happens every 2 years. Did
Correct.
that answer your? Go ahead.
And I was just going to add, the Council on Transportation actually, I think 2 weeks ago at this point, approved the 25 to 30 CTP by approved. I mean, it went to the governor, and then will be reviewed by the legislature and incorporated into the budget for the fiscal year, that kind of work.
Thank you. And that does partially explain the process. I've heard that explanation, going back even to Mr. Boyce, that's on the line here, back when he was on the other side of the table. But from my perception in the public, it seems the process of scoring seems to result in what Mr. McCarron described as maintenance projects, more small little place projects, an interchange at a particular intersection, not a master plan that results in, let's call it what Mr. McCarron said, which was a 4-lane highway that gets you from the Maryland border to the Eastern Shore. It results in these small little projects. I understand the study may be the first step in that, but the study as presented so far, and I will take some time and look at the link to the plan and report that's available, but it looks like it's emphasizing piecemeal, not an overall project that, hey, let's fix getting from A to B.
Well, thank you for your comment. Yep.
That's just my comment, and I'll make sure I put that in writing if that holds up once I look at the detail. Thank you.
I just wanted to add on, and thank you for your comment. I just want to add on to that, and certainly agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think a big thing that we have to take into consideration is that factors change, and it's that's something we try to consider while we're doing these studies, is the fact that things in a year to 5 years could change from what we've outlined, and so certainly understand that those piecemeal improvements are working to address a situation at that time in that area, which might affect longer term changes. And those are the kinds of things that we continue to monitor, and we continue to implement into other studies and into the future projects. So just wanted to add that piece onto that.
Christy, see your hand.
In a similar vein to what they've asked, is there, I guess I'm questioning the slide that has the volumes and the fact that you're still seeing the volume going north to south or south to north versus east to west. Is there, I guess my question there is it because those roads are highway dual, 2 lanes, that people are choosing to go that way, or and versus east to west because they know how slow it is? There's ways to go around when we're trying to get to one point or another. And then I guess the question is how do we measure that volume, and is it a good measuring tool? Because obviously, Maryland has seen the need for the east to west and has acted accordingly. So why haven't we? I mean, I know their reasons may be different, and maybe they had money to do so, and maybe they had the space to do so, but just questioning why they saw the need and we didn't, and you know, is the measuring tool where it should be, as far as, you know, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not saying I.
Those are good questions. A lot to unpack. And you might need to remind me the sub questions within. So I'll try to capture. So why are the volumes more north-south? I'm not a traffic engineer, but generally speaking, like you can see 113, those are US highways. So yes, you're right. Like generally the axiom in transportation planning is if you build it, they will come. And so if you build something wide, people will fill that with cars. And I think then that brings up somewhat of a response to everyone's question here, but yours, I think you pinpointed it a little bit more so is, or maybe I'm reading into it, but there's, if you reflect on if you build it, they will come. We talked about through this process, kind of, do we want our towns to be where people come through, come to, stop, or do we just want to send them around? And that's a critical question, and I don't think that one's hard to resolve anywhere. And so we came out of this process, I think, hearing, you know, there is a desire to get people to the towns and to stop. You've got the Amity Cafe up in Greenwood, and you've got, you know, several economic development efforts in towns that I think certainly those owners of those destinations want people to stop in town. So let's see. Then why do we use, or how do we measure, and is it a good tool? So one thing is you've got some interesting new emerging tools, big data. There is so much that has happened in the last 4 years. And this started about 4 years ago. It was kind of around COVID. So I think, you know, we have been using tools from the broad area-wide, the visuals that you see here really reflect how the Delaware travel demand model helps us to try to get a sense of what's kind of the range of things that are plausible or likely in the future. Now, the challenge too is that the population has kind of gone up and down. You know, you've had lots of people moving around the world, period. But even here in the beach areas, you know, in this process, we talked about folks from the DC area who are now almost not quite permanent residents, but kind of going back and forth and maybe spending more time during the week closer to the beaches. And so there's that challenge of fully understanding and pinpointing, because I don't think you ever will fully pinpoint, you know, what's going to happen in the future. So that kind of addresses your question, but other tools, you know, are several that this broader coastal corridor study used, is collecting traffic data and trying to get as up to date, you know, current information, and then doing our best to use trends and kind of statistics to anticipate what's going to happen. But there's only so much, you know, precision there. So I'm not sure that's answering your question. I hope it is to a degree. I do know that the coastal corridors, the report that's in draft form and coming out soon, focused a bit more on the eastern side, gives a pretty good amount of technical background. So if you're really interested in kind of where all of this math comes from and that type of thing, I'll definitely encourage you to keep an eye out for that. Did I answer your questions, Christy? Okay, nodding. All right, and I am looking at the time, 12:05. thank you everyone for sticking with us. I don't see anyone else's questions, and the chat seems to be good. So with that, let me just make a few closing comments, and Austin, if you have anything else too. So again, not to beat a dead horse, but the idea of going forward, do please connect with us through the public input page, or if that's not something you're comfortable with or you're not figuring it out, reach out, because that is where we're really going to try to streamline to make sure information is getting to you all. The Newton Road corridor study, we'll be in touch with the town, and you know, as that progresses, you'll hear from us. Do reach out if there's anything, you know, new that came to mind that you want to share, because we're just getting going with that. So please do reach out to us, and I'll go down to our contact info as I speak here. And then lastly, to echo Austin's point about sharing the information about the public input pages and sharing the links and letting people know that the draft is out and available for comment would be greatly appreciated. That you all have been very helpful, and we're so glad we were able to have you involved over this last year and a half-ish, and do stay in touch. So Austin, anything else?
No, I don't have any comments.
Well, thank you again. I hope everyone is staying well, and we'll look forward to our next touch point.
Everything will be posted online on the public input website. So we'll put this video on the Del.Dot YouTube page and link that to the public input website, and then the report itself is also in there, and everything can be found in that report that was shared today.